Santiago arrived at the ranch on a hot afternoon. The sun was high in the sky, and dust covered the dry ground. He wore an old hat, dusty boots, and a simple shirt. His eyes were calm but focused. He carried a small bag and a coiled rope on his shoulder. He walked to the main house and knocked on the door. The ranch owner, Mr. Morales, opened it and looked at him. "What do you want?" he asked. "I need work," Santiago said. Mr. Morales frowned. "We only hire real cowboys here. Can you ride?" Near the stable, the ranch workers watched Santiago. They whispered and laughed. "Another fool who thinks he can tame the wild horse," one said. "He won't last a week," another added. Santiago heard them, but he stayed quiet. Mr. Morales crossed his arms. He looked at Santiago for a moment. "You can start by cleaning the stables," he said. "Maybe later. I'll let you work with the horses." Santiago nodded. "Thank you, sir," he said. He picked up a shovel and went to work. In the stable, Santiago saw a large, wild horse. The animal was covered in dust and had many scars. It kicked the ground and neighed loudly. The other cowboys had tried to tame it, but they all failed. The horse threw every rider to the ground. "This horse is a problem," said Ramiro, the most experienced cowboy. "No one can control him." Another cowboy shook his head. "We have tried everything: ropes, spurs, shouting." Mr. Morales sighed. "If no one tames him in 5 days, I will sell him." Santiago watched carefully. He did not like how the cowboys treated the horse. They pulled the ropes hard, yelled, and hit him. The horse fought back, full of fear. "This is the wrong way," Santiago thought. But he said nothing. At the end of the day, the cowboys were tired and angry. "This horse is useless," one of them said. "We are wasting our time." Santiago continued cleaning the stable, but his mind was busy. He knew there was another way. The next morning, Santiago saw the cowboys try again. They tied strong ropes and used sharp spurs. The horse kicked wildly, refusing to obey. Santiago shook his head. He knew this method would not work. "This is not the right way," Santiago said. The cowboys laughed at him. "Oh? And what do you know?" asked Ramiro. Santiago looked at the horse. "Horses do not listen to fear. They listen when they trust," he replied. Ramiro crossed his arms. "So, you think you are better than us?" Santiago smiled slightly. "I do not force a horse. I talk to him." The cowboys laughed louder. "Talk to a horse? You are crazy." Santiago did not argue. He only watched the horse and waited. He knew words would not be enough. He needed to show them. He took a deep breath and remained patient. Mr. Morales heard the conversation and walked over. He looked at Santiago with suspicion. "Do you think you know more than my cowboys?" he asked. Santiago did not hesitate. "I don't know more, sir. I just know something different." Mr. Morales raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" Santiago pointed at the horse. "This animal is not angry. He is afraid. He fights because he does not trust you." Mr. Morales sighed. "I don't have time for tricks. I need results." Santiago stayed calm. "Give me a chance. 5 days," he said. Ramiro laughed. "You will waste your time," he said. Mr. Morales thought for a moment. Then he shook his head. "You are new here. Keep cleaning the stables. Maybe later I will trust you." Santiago did not argue. He just smiled and returned to work. He knew he needed more than words to prove himself. He needed a real opportunity. Ramiro did not like Santiago. He was the best cowboy on the ranch, and he did not want a newcomer changing things. "This man thinks he knows everything," Ramiro muttered. but he understands nothing about horses. At lunchtime, the cowboys sat together. Ramiro looked at Santiago and smiled in a mean way. "Tell me, Santiago, if you are so good, why are you still cleaning the stables?" The others laughed. Santiago looked at him and shrugged. "Because every job has value," he replied. Ramiro slammed his hand on the table. "If you keep talking about respect, you will fall off a horse faster than any of us." Santiago only smiled. "Maybe. But I would rather fall trying something new than repeat the same mistake." The other cowboys were silent for a moment. Some thought about Santiago's words, but Ramiro just scoffed and stood up. "We will see how long you last here," he said, walking away. That afternoon, the cowboys tried again. Ramiro tied the ropes tighter and pulled hard. "Now he will obey," he said. The horse neighed loudly and kicked the air. The other cowboys watched, waiting for the fight. Ramiro climbed onto the horse and dug his spurs into its sides. The horse jumped and twisted. It kicked its legs high in the air. Ramiro held on, but the horse was strong. Suddenly, the horse reared up, and Ramiro lost control. Ramiro fell hard to the ground. His head hit a rock, and he did not move. The cowboys gasped. The horse, still wild, stomped the ground near Ramiro's body. His heavy hooves could crush him. No one knew what to do. Santiago did not wait. He ran into the corral and raised his hands. He made soft sounds and moved slowly. The horse turned to him, still breathing fast. Santiago's voice was low and steady. "It's okay," he said. The horse hesitated, but Santiago kept calm. The horse stepped back. Its ears twitched, listening to Santiago. The cowboys watched in silence. Santiago kept his hands up, moving slowly. He was not afraid. He was not forcing the horse. He was speaking to it. "Get Ramiro out," Santiago said. 2 cowboys ran forward and pulled Ramiro away. He groaned, but was still unconscious. Santiago stayed inside the corral. The horse pawed the ground but did not attack. The tension was high. No one had ever seen the horse this calm. Santiago lowered his hands slowly. "You don't need to fight," he whispered. The horse snorted but did not move away. A moment of peace passed between them. Mr. Morales stepped forward. "That was impressive," he said. "You controlled him without ropes or force." Santiago shook his head. "I didn't control him. I just showed him I wasn't his enemy." "Mr." Morales looked at him thoughtfully. That evening, Ramiro woke up with a headache. "What happened?" he asked. The cowboys told him about Santiago and the horse. Ramiro frowned but said nothing. He did not like that Santiago had saved him. Mr. Morales called Santiago to his office. "You have 5 days," he said. "If you can tame that horse, he stays. If you fail, I will sell him." Santiago nodded. "I understand," he said, "but I will not use ropes or force." The cowboys laughed when they heard Santiago's plan. "You will fail," one said. "That horse is too wild." Santiago only smiled. "We will see," he replied. He walked to the corral and sat near the fence. The horse watched him from a distance. Santiago did not approach. He only sat there, letting the horse get used to his presence. The first step was trust, and trust took time. He had 5 days, but he was patient. On the first day, Santiago did not touch the horse. He stayed near the fence and watched. The horse watched him too. Sometimes it walked away. Sometimes it stood still. But it did not attack. The cowboys whispered among themselves. "This is stupid," one said. "He is doing nothing." Ramiro smirked. "Wait and see. He will give up." But Miguel, a younger cowboy, was curious. "Maybe he knows something we don't," he said. On the second day, Santiago stepped into the corral. He did not move toward the horse. He only stood there. The horse flicked its tail but did not run. Santiago breathed slowly and stayed calm. He was waiting for the horse to come to him. The cowboys shook their heads. "This is a waste of time," Ramiro muttered. But Miguel kept watching. He was starting to believe Santiago's method was different. Maybe it could work. By the third day, the horse no longer ran from Santiago. It stood still when he entered the corral. Santiago did not rush. He let the horse decide when to move closer. He was patient. He was gentle. The cowboys watched. Some still laughed. "He will never ride that horse," one said. "He is too slow." But Miguel was interested. "Look at the horse," he said. "It is not fighting anymore." The others looked and saw it was true. Ramiro crossed his arms. "That means nothing," he said. "Trust is useless without control." Santiago heard him but did not answer. He focused on the horse. He reached out his hand, but he did not touch. He let the horse decide. The horse lowered its head slightly. It was not ready to be ridden, but it was not afraid anymore. It was a small step, but Santiago knew it was an important one. He had 2 days left. On the 4th day, Santiago stood near the horse again. This time, he moved a little closer. The horse watched him carefully but did not step back. It flicked its ears, listening to every small sound. Santiago did not rush. He kept his movements slow and calm. After a few minutes, he stretched out his hand. The horse hesitated but did not run. Its breathing was steady, and its muscles were relaxed. The cowboys stood by the fence, watching in silence. "He is getting closer," Miguel said. "Maybe this will work." Ramiro shook his head. "That horse will never let him touch it," he muttered. Santiago waited. Then, slowly, the horse leaned forward. Its nose touched Santiago's fingers for just a second. The moment was brief, but it was enough. Trust had begun. That evening, the cowboys talked about what they saw. "Did you see that?" Miguel asked. "The horse let him touch it." Some nodded, but others were still unsure. "That doesn't mean he can ride it," one said. Ramiro was annoyed. "This is a trick," he said. "The horse is just tired of fighting," Miguel frowned. "Maybe, but maybe Santiago understands something we don't." Ramiro scoffed and walked away. The next morning, Santiago entered the corral again. The horse did not run or kick. It stood still, waiting. Santiago spoke in a low voice. "Good boy," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you." For the first time, the horse took a step toward him. The other cowboys saw it happen. Some still doubted, but a few were starting to believe. Miguel smiled. "I think he is winning its trust," he whispered. On the 5th day, Santiago knew it was time for the next step. He walked closer and reached out his hand again. The horse stayed calm. Slowly, Santiago touched its neck. It did not move away. But then, something startled the horse. A loud noise came from the barn. The horse neighed loudly and jumped back. Its ears flattened, and its muscles tensed. For a moment, fear returned. Santiago stepped back and took a deep breath. He did not want to scare the horse again, but he felt the weight of the 5-day deadline. The horse had made progress, but would it be enough? The cowboys whispered among themselves. "Maybe the horse is still too wild," one said. Even Miguel looked worried. Santiago knew he had to stay patient. Trust was not built in a single moment. That afternoon, Mr. Morales called Santiago. "Your 5 days are up," he said. "Can you ride the horse?" Santiago thought for a moment. "I can try," he answered. "But I will not use ropes or spurs." Ramiro smirked. "You're a fool. That horse will throw you down like the others." Santiago ignored him. He walked toward the corral with slow, steady steps. The other cowboys followed, watching closely. The horse stood in the middle of the corral, waiting. Santiago entered, but he did not rush. He stood still, letting the horse feel his presence. The wind was quiet. The world seemed to pause. Santiago stretched out his hand. The horse lowered its head slightly. The cowboys held their breath. Would the horse accept him or reject him? This was the final test. For a long moment, Santiago and the horse just looked at each other. The horse's dark eyes were full of power. Santiago did not force it. He only waited. He trusted the horse to decide. Then, slowly, the horse stepped forward. It touched Santiago's palm with its nose. The connection was real. The cowboys gasped. Even Ramiro was silent. "I don't believe it," someone whispered. Santiago moved carefully. He ran his hand along the horse's neck. Then, without a saddle or rope, he lifted himself onto its back. It accepted him completely. "Mr. Morales nodded. "You have proven yourself," he said. The cowboys looked at Santiago with new respect. The wild horse was not broken. It was free, but now it had chosen to trust. The cowboys stood in silence, watching Santiago on the horse's back. The horse did not buck, kick, or run. It stood tall, proud, and calm. Santiago gently stroked its neck, whispering soft words. Miguel smiled. "I never thought I would see this," he said. Some of the other cowboys nodded. Even those who had doubted now looked at Santiago with respect. Ramiro, however, crossed his arms and frowned. Mr. Morales approached the corral. "This is impressive," he admitted. "But tell me, Santiago, why did your method work?" Santiago looked at him. "Because I did not try to break him," he said. "I gave him a choice." The cowboys exchanged glances. They had always believed horses had to be controlled through force. But now, they saw something different. Respect, not fear, had won the horse's trust. That evening, the cowboys sat around the fire. They talked about what they had seen. "So, Santiago," one cowboy asked, "do you think all horses can be tamed like this?" Santiago nodded. "Every horse is different, but trust is always the key." Miguel looked at Ramiro. "You still don't believe it, do you?" Ramiro shook his head. "I believe what I saw," he admitted. "But I don't understand it." Santiago smiled. "You don't have to understand it," he said. "You just have to feel it." Ramiro sighed and looked into the fire. He had always believed that control meant power. But now, he saw that true power came from patience. "Maybe we don't need to fight them so much," one said. "Maybe we can learn from them." Santiago listened and smiled. A small change had begun. The next morning, Mr. Morales called Santiago to his office. "I made a decision," he said. "I want you to stay here, not just as a worker, but as the leader of the cowboys." Santiago raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" Mr. Morales nodded. "You have shown me something new. I was wrong to think force was the only way. I want you to teach my men." Santiago looked out the window. The cowboys were already practicing new techniques with the horses. "I will do it," Santiago said. "But we need new rules. No more harsh treatment. No more fear. Only respect." Mr. Morales sighed. "This will be difficult for some men to accept." Santiago smiled. "Trust takes time. But it is worth it." Mr. Morales extended his hand. "Then it's settled," he said. "From today you are in charge." Santiago shook his hand. He had arrived as an outsider, but now he was part of something bigger. That afternoon, Santiago returned to the corral. The horse was standing near the fence, waiting. Santiago opened the gate and walked inside. The horse did not move away. It had accepted him completely. Miguel and a few other cowboys stood by the fence. "What will you call him?" Miguel asked. Santiago thought for a moment. "Spirit," he said, "because he was never broken." Miguel smiled. "That's a good name." Santiago reached out and touched Spirit's mane. "A horse is not just an animal," he said. "He is a partner. When we respect them, they respect us." Miguel nodded. "I think I understand now." Ramiro, standing further back, listened in silence. He still had doubts, but deep inside, he knew Santiago was right. He just was not ready to admit it. Not yet. Days passed, and the ranch began to change. The cowboys started using Santiago's methods. The horses were calmer, and the work was smoother. Mr. Morales saw the results and was pleased. One morning, Santiago stood outside the barn, looking at the open fields. Spirit stood beside him, free but loyal. "You saved him," Miguel said, walking up. Santiago shook his head. "No," he said. "He saved me too." Ramiro approached, holding a saddle. "Can you teach me?" he asked, his voice low. Santiago looked at him and smiled. "Of course," he said. Trust is built step by step. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting light over the ranch. It was a new day, and a new way of working had begun. Santiago had changed the ranch forever, and in return, the ranch had changed him too.